Practical Tantra. For Tantra to be practical, it means it has to be something we can really do here and now. And for the sake of this discussion, Tantra means a certain style of spiritual practice. The word Tantra also means a body of literature. It's been used to refer to neo-tantric sexual practices. None of that, the sexual practices are related to the tradition as it exists in South Asia. And so that's not what we're going to be talking about here. The presumption of the system is that you're wanting to become enlightened. And so that is ever the focus of practice. Now, the essence of enlightenment is that there's only one infinite consciousness, and all of everything we see, including ourselves, is ultimately only that. That infinite consciousness is what's called Satchidananda, being, consciousness, bliss. And those three things are not three attributes of it, but three ways of looking at the same thing. Existence is consciousness, is bliss. Now, our existence from day to day isn't usually bliss necessarily. They might have moments of bliss if we're fortunate. But as Buddha pointed out, that ordinary life is fraught with suffering, as we know, especially now in this difficult time of COVID-19. So Buddha's message of Jivanam Dukkham, the life is suffering, is particularly vividly illustrated to us. Some modern, especially Western Buddhists, like to temper that message a little bit and say, life is disappointing. And perhaps that is a more balanced way of looking at what Buddha was meant. And that is that life, as long as we remain in this perception, this illusion that we are limited to this body-mind organism, that our identity is limited to this, that we will always find life disappointing. Nothing will completely satisfy us because it is short of the totality of who and what we are. So that unhappiness, that disappointment, the suffering, are provided impetus for finding out a way out of the suffering, as Buddha said. And so we're not talking about escape now. We're not talking about drugs or denial, any of the common ways that people try to overcome suffering. It's not even really about self-help in that sense, because the whole concept of self that we have, this body-mind concept of self, is the core of the problem. So the beginning of Practical Tantra is looking at our assumptions about what it means to be a person, about personality. And personality will be a thread that runs all through tantric practice. And the fact that we do experience ourselves as a person is an obstacle on one side, but on the other side, is a habit we can use with skillful means to overcome our usual limited ways of thinking of ourselves or experiencing ourselves. So one of the ways that it's common not only to Tantra but other spiritual systems is to analyze what is this self that we experience ourselves to be. We start with the physical aspect of ourselves. Modern biology tells us that there is no single part of this multicellular structure that we call our body that we can identify as ourselves. No matter where you look, you can always find smaller and smaller bits that are somehow more than the sum of their parts. Yet when they come together, we have bacteria that aren't even human that are essential for our life in our guts, for instance. Mitochondrial or ancient bacteria that have insinuated themselves in our cells that provide energy for us. Viruses and other things have been introduced, so we have cells, we have tissues, we have systems. No one thing can we point to and say, well, there's where you are. You might say, well, there's the brain. The brain is not a single thing. It has many different things. There's different voices there. There's different hemispheres that sometimes seem to talk to each other or don't. There's some striking experiments have done where the corpus callosum has been severed and people lose or gain different abilities that show that even that organ, which we think of as sort of maybe the quintessential identity organ, which undoubtedly is very important, is still not definitive. It doesn't define us. It doesn't sum us up. So that inquiry into who are we, who am I, begins with the physical body. And just thinking about it beyond the surface, we have to admit that there has to be something more to us than just the physical body. So then we're left, then the mind. Fine, very good. What is the mind anyway? So, mind, ever-changing. Perceptions come, feelings, thoughts, random thoughts. There seems to be a simple organizing structure there, or function, which in Sanskrit is called ahamkara, the I maker. So the I maker takes all these experiences we have of the physical body and the mind and mental experience and unifies them into a sense of identity. Relates all these things to a certain point of awareness, point of consciousness. But the ahamkara is not a thing, it's a function. It's a process, like a rainbow, or waterfall is a process. It's not a thing, not a fixed thing you can point to and say, well, that's what it is and that's what it has always been. It's a movement. It's a movement of mental functions that creates a certain impression. And the example I like to use, because it's so apt, is if you've ever taken a flashlight in the dark and spun it around, it creates an illusion of a circle, an unbroken circle of light. Logically, we know that it's only a single point of light that's creating an illusion of a circle, and yet our eyes and brains, the way they're constructed, can't see the point, that we only see the circle. We can infer the point, but we can't see it. And so, likewise, this body-mind organism is a whirling swirl of functions that creates an illusion, the impression of a self. But in fact, there's only a single essential element to that. And that essential element lies behind the body, as it were, to use a spatial metaphor, behind the mind. And that is the illuminating consciousness, which is our essential self, and which is the essential self of the whole universe. So that's the beginning of Practical Tantra, is to start analyzing our experience of self, our perception of self, our beliefs about self, and seeing how insubstantial they are when you really get into it, and that the only lasting, the only permanent thing within all that change is consciousness.